Welcome everyone to NCEA's A Closer Look at the National Standards and Benchmarks for Effective Catholic Elementary and Secondary Schools Operational Vitality webinar. My name is Kate Reich and I am on hand as the organizer of today's event. Before we begin the presentation, I hope you all have available a copy of the standards that will be discussed this evening. In just a few moments, I will send out a web link where you can access the standards as they will be referenced during this webinar. Please know that all of your microphone connections with today's webinar have been muted. During the presentation, you may ask questions or provide comments for the presenter by using the chat and/or questions function located in the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. To use these functions, click on the chat or question bubble and then click into the blank box area and enter your question using your keyboard. Then click Send. The webinar presentation will run for 45 to 50 minutes, leaving some time at the end for the presenter to answer any questions that you've provided. You will be asked to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar later today, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a copy of the final recorded presentation, which we will email to you once the recorded file is available. Now I'm very pleased to introduce both Dr. Lorraine Ozar, Director of the Andrew M. Greeley Center for Catholic Education at Loyola University Chicago, and Dr. Patricia Weitzel O'Neill, Executive Director for the Barbara and Patrick Roche Center for Catholic Education at Boston College. Dr. Ozar will be making further introductions before we begin the presentation, and I welcome Dr. Ozar to the microphone.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon to all the Catholic educators who have joined us. We're delighted to be now bringing you this second of our series of 4 webinars going deeper into the national standards and benchmarks by taking a closer look at each domain. Last month we looked at mission and Catholic identity, and today we will be looking more closely at operational vitality. We are really privileged to have as our presenter today Dr. Patricia Weitzel O'Neill. Dr. Weitzel O'Neill, as you know, is one of the lead authors of the standards and benchmarks, and also on the National Writing Committee for the rubrics. One of her special areas of focus has been working with the area of operational vitality. So we are delighted that she will be coming with us to do this, that she will be giving us this presentation. I will be monitoring questions and comments in the chat box as we go, and we may stop at various points throughout the presentation to respond to some of the questions. And then, as Kate said, there will be some time at the end. So now I am happy and pleased to turn this over to Dr. Patricia Weitzel O'Neill.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be with you today. As I said, I'm in Boise, Idaho at St. Mary's Catholic School. It's 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock on the East Coast. And today we have the opportunity to talk about the domain of operational vitality. I noticed that those of you who are participating today represent principals, presidents, and teachers and board members. And so I hope that this is beneficial to all of you and that you will each look at these standards from the perspective of the work that you do and how you can contribute to the operational vitality of your school. The goals for today are similar to the goals of the previous sessions. We will identify and explore the core concepts, particularly with relation to standards 10, 11, 12, and 13, and the benchmarks. We will examine some of the key criteria for assessing school performance in this domain, and we'll consider how these standards and benchmarks impact school improvement. One of the things that we really want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with is the context for Domain 4, as well as some of the vocabulary. We'll talk about the rubrics, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about the new tools that will soon be unveiled in late fall of 2014. Going to the next slide, I think the context that we want to keep in mind whenever we do this work is that all of these 4 domains are intricately linked, but it is the first domain of mission and Catholic identity that drives everything. That mission statement answers why and why you exist and who you serve. And based on that mission statement, which does not change, it's rooted in your steep Catholic tradition, you build your vision, and based on that vision, you build your strategic plan or other planning documents. And so you'll see in the domain of operational vitality, the language of planning is frequent and oftenly referred to. And Catholic identity has to be permeating all of this. So as you plan your finances to reach the goals you've set in your vision and fulfill your mission, the sense of Catholic identity should be present. And sometimes I say make sure that you invite God to the conversation. And sometimes that makes that conversation about finances a little more bearable. Moving on, operational vitality, domain 4, has 4 standards and 18 benchmarks. There's a lot of work in operational vitality when you use these benchmarks to assess where you are and where you're headed. The context for operational vitality is really something you all need to be thinking about. Catholic schools are temporal organizations. They're here today, and we, those of us who have the privilege of working in Catholic education, are the hosts. We are hosting those who come to our schools, and somebody else will host in the future. As temporal organizations, they're committed to the Church and the mission of Catholic education, and we are committed to moving those schools forward so that they are here in the future for the next generation and the next group of folks who will take on these vocations. But at the same time, these schools exist in constant socioeconomic change and continuous need for sustainable financial planning, marketing, the development of human resources, facilities enhancement, and institutional advancement. All of that is going on, and at the same time, we are committed to Catholic identity when we plan for all of these things that we're trying to address. The change is continuous, and we have to be there for it. We have a statement in standards in this section that I think is really quite important. When a school does not maintain the standards for operational vitality, the continuation of the academic excellence is in grave jeopardy. You have to really feel that sense of commitment to the mission, build the vision, and out of that will flow your plans for operational vitality. And so often in Catholic education, this is the one domain that's been overlooked. We say our prayers and look for the money to grow on trees, and it just doesn't happen. The standards for operational vitality have to focus on the operation of the school. That's the day-to-day, turn on the lights, make sure there's desks and chairs and tables and computers and facilities, and tell the good news. So what you're really doing in operational vitality, you are dealing in 4 key vision areas. And what I mean by that is when you construct your vision and develop your plan, you are doing it in the 4 areas addressed in the domain of operational vitality. And those areas have to do with things that a CEO of a small to mid-sized nonprofit organization is usually responsible for. But our principals today have a triple role. Maybe it's because of the inspiration of the Trinity, I'm not sure, but they are the academic leader, they are the spiritual leader, they are the CEO of the school. And as the academic leader, the spiritual leader, we talk about that a lot, and most people are very comfortable with that. It's being the CEO that our principals need a lot of help with. And so if you're a board member, think about the widely different roles we're requiring. It's a diverse set of skills and knowledge. It's very different gifts and talents. And quite frankly, each one of these requires different approaches to leadership. And all of them require an enormous amount of time, which is the one treasure we all seem to be short on. And so if you're a board member or you're a faculty person, think about the role of your principal and how you can assist serving on committees, serving in professional learning communities, and working together to fulfill the benchmarks that are required to be successful in these 4 areas. Go to the next slide. We see that the academic leader and the spiritual leader, when that person becomes the CEO, they're responsible for everything that's in this pie chart to the right on your screen. All of those pieces of the pie are the things that we address in the area of operational vitality. It's a huge, huge and complex job. In most organizations, this work is done by a team of people. Each person on the team has training in each one of these pieces of the pie. And so when you think about the successful, effective Catholic school, there has to be a team of people supporting the work of the principal. You may say the principal is accountable, and that is important. She or he must make sure the work gets done. But there needs to be others who are responsible for marketing, responsible for human resources, responsible for facilities, and that are working as a team with the principal. Next slide. So let's take a look at it a different way. Several clicks here. Governance and leadership. We have the standards. We have the standards 5 and 6. But when you take a look at operational vitality, you've got standards 10, 11, 12, and 13. 4 standards, 18 benchmarks. So we're going to dive in now. We're going to just dive in to standard 10. I'm going to try to walk you through a fair amount of it, and then we'll take a look at the other 3 standards as well, and then move to some of the new tools. So hang on to your hats. Here we go. Standard 10, everybody's favorite topic, how to build the nest egg. Standard 10 really basically says you have to have a 3 to 5 year financial plan. It has to include the current budget and the projected budget. But most importantly, and I was just meeting with the board, it has to be the result of a collaborative process. And you have to emphasize faithful stewardship. Bring others in your community into the conversation. Everybody wants the school. Let them help you build that nest egg. And when we do that, next slide, you can see that Standard 10 deals with the area of finance, accounting, and technology. So those 3 areas are where you're going to see the benchmarks really stress the kinds of things that we need to be doing. So if we move on to the next slide, you can take a good look at each one of the benchmarks. Now, I clearly have summarized each benchmark because they're a little lengthy, and I'm going to try to speak to them now in terms of what you need to look for when you assess where you are on that particular benchmark. So benchmark 10.1 says financial planning, collaboration, and experts. Is there financial planning going on in a continuous way? Do you have the people involved? Are you collaborating? And more importantly, who are the experts you're bringing in to support the work of financial planning? Can you document that? Can you show evidence of that? Your plans have established levels of investment by partners. So if you have a school that is partnering with a parish or is in fact owned by a parish or partnering with other schools or other parishes, is it very clear in the plan what investment the other entities are making? Is it agreed upon, or is it simply a shake of the hand? You really need to have something that's very substantial if you're going to have a partnership supporting your school. 10.3 talks about defining all revenue sources and being inclusive. This is a very extensive, difficult benchmark to work through, because what are your revenue sources? Is it simply tuition? No, it's much more. Can you identify all of them? And when you do that, do you have the revenue you need to fulfill that great, audacious vision that you have for your school? And if you do, or if you don't, excuse me, where will you get those revenues? What are your possible revenue sources? 10.4 talks about itemizing the costs. There are costs associated with every single area, and if you need to be able to list that. So if you have that vision and you have the plan, what will every step of fulfilling that plan cost, and how will you do that in each one of the key areas that you identify? 10.5 tells you that all budgets need to include the actual and projected revenue sources and expenditures. Here's the hard one, folks, the actual cost per child and your benchmarked personnel costs. These are two terms that make everyone really quite nervous, and I'd like to speak in their favor. The first is the cost per child. How do you calculate that? Do you include what it will really cost you to educate each child in your building? Does that include the electricity, the water, the facilities maintenance, depreciation? Does that include the projected personnel costs? Does it include the in-kind contributions? The actual cost of educating a child in a Catholic school today across the United States is anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 at the grade school level. And yet many of us are really undervaluing the great brand and quality that we have. And people don't realize that you are in fact supplementing the cost of their child's education. The other thing is benchmarking your personnel costs. You may have sister teaching for you this year, and she's only being paid a stipend of $2,000 or $3,000. But the reality is that if you were to replace sister, it would cost you $40,000. Do you have that built into your budget? Because that's actually the cost of educating the child. So this is a big one. It takes a lot of time, and you really, really have to work on that to build the real plan. You have to include some explanatory materials for all in the community. That is educational materials to be transparent, to let everyone in your community understand your budgeting process, how much things cost, and what you hope to be the sources of your revenue. 10.7 is that governance and leadership provide tuition assistance information. And that's a new one. How are you helping your families plan? What kind of guidance are you giving them so they can plan to pay tuition going forward rather than scrambling every payment period? And 10.8 is governance and leadership use current and effective business practices for good stewardship. Are you using good business practices? And do you have folks on your board and throughout the community that can help you? So this is just, touching upon probably the hardest standard in operational vitality. One of the things that's coming forward in the future is a glossary that will be providing you with definitions for some of the terms in this domain, as well as all of the other domains. And that'll be coming out in the new guidelines for using the benchmarks later this fall. So here's an example of the kind of thing that you'll find in the glossary. Those of you who are business folks, you will note that these are pretty standard definitions of budget and gap. But what's important is that we have tried to take these definitions and incorporate the language of Catholic schools, or the language of schools. So when you talk about a qualitative expression of a financial plan, you're talking about including projected enrollment, your sources of revenue, tuition, school depreciation, and so forth. Remember, the budget is an expression of your strategic plan. It is not your plan. It is an expression of it. And the gap is just that. It is the financial accounting that's used in any given jurisdiction that allows you to understand the basic principles of your budgeting. So this is the standard standard kinds of definitions that you're going to need going forward. Going into the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about current budget practices, and that's why this one's so important. There's a picture of a spiral staircase there, and the reason for that is because so often when we're planning our budgets, the mission is missing. We're not really remembering why we're doing this or who we're serving. A lot of times there's no plan for the vision. We just simply plan a budget for that year. It's not step by step. It's rather circular. We keep bumping into ourselves, and our goal is to get to the end. If we can just get through this year, then we can say our budgeting was successful. And folks, it's got to be longer term and has to be, again, reflecting your vision. When you do plan the budget, make sure that you are planning ahead of time. What is the necessary desired outcomes for your vision? What is your big, quote, hairy idea? How can you engage in discernment when you're having the conversation with the board and the community? And did you bother to invite God to the process? And what I'm really talking about there is going back to that Catholic identity and asking yourself, is this, are we spending the money on what it is that we say we are and why we are here? And finally, take a good look at what the outcomes are as you're planning your budget. The two biggest things you have to look at is what your costs will be and how you're going to finance that. Next slide, all I can say is make a plan. That is the underlying premise of Domain 4. You simply need to make a plan. And so I'm happy to stop here if folks have questions. Otherwise, I'll move on to Standard 11. Lorraine, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Patty, and no questions so far.
Okay, so going to the next slide, Human Resources and Personnel, that's Standard 11. Folks, we have great people working in our Catholic schools, and together they're doing amazing things. I have the privilege of seeing just amazing faculty. I'm seeing amazing faculty here in Boise, Idaho today, and amazing classrooms. We've got to have human resource policies that are published. They need to be developed in compliance with your archdiocesan policies and or any religious congregation that's sponsoring you. They have to provide clarity for the responsibilities and expectations, and how are you holding your resources, your human resources, accountable. Not just your faculty, but all of your staff. And are they all envisioning themselves as part of stewards of this mission? Do they know your mission, and are they engaged in that? That really is so important to success in this domain. So if we take a look at this Standard 11 Human Resources, we see that it's only one piece of the pie, but it's a huge piece of the pie, because without the talent and treasure of those who are in your classrooms every day and on the front line, it makes it very difficult to provide them with the service that we want. If we take a look at the benchmarks for Standard 11, you can see that we have 4 benchmarks. Human resources is professionally staffed and in full compliance. So do you have a professional person that's assisting you, and or several schools may be in partnership, on doing the legally correct thing in human resources? When I work with boards and schools, I often say failure to meet the benchmarks on 11 often leads to one of those wonderful things we call lawsuits. And lawyers who might be out there attending this webinar, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Benchmark 2 says that your HR policies have standards for position descriptions, that people understand what the compensation scale is. There's professional development, and there's accountability. So what are your policies to provide compensation? And that includes retirement, that includes although health care. It also includes professional development. How are you growing the talent in your building? What piece of the budget has been set aside to do that? And most importantly, as we all know, what are your measures of accountability? Are they clear Are they openly shared? And do people understand what they're accountable for? And how will you measure that? How will you assess that? How will it contribute to the staff's professional growth? 11.3, HR policies ensure competitive and just salaries and professional development for all staff. So let's take a look at that one. That, again, is another one people don't like to talk about because, gee golly whiz, our Catholic school teachers are wonderful people, and they do this because they love God. Well, they also have to feed their families, and many of them would love to send their children to our Catholic schools. And do you know there's a lot of Catholic school teachers who leave us and move over to the public school to earn a just wage so they can afford to send their own children to Catholic schools? Somehow or another, we have to find a way to address that and to address it quickly. It's not simply the need to pay salaries that will be competitive so that we get the best teachers in our schools, but more importantly, we do have these things called the social justice teachings of the Catholic Church, and our schools need to adhere to those as well. 11.4, HR policies ensure investment in personnel. What kind of health care do you have? Days off, personal days. What are you doing for those who are retiring? Do you have early retirement for those who might need early retirement? And what are you doing to grow not only your personnel, but what's your succession plan for your leadership team? Who's coming next? And I hope any of you who are teachers today listening and participating in this webinar will see the road ahead as one of leadership, because we certainly need strong leaders in Catholic education. And so Standard 11 has 4 benchmarks, and again, each one of these are benchmarks that you can measure by simply looking at some of the things that I have addressed here today. Here's a good example. Here's a definition for human resource policies. They're systems of codified decisions established by any organization. Some dioceses have really substantial human resource policies that you must adhere to. Some do not, and the schools have to develop their own. But it supports the administrative and personnel functions. It allows you to have performance management. It allows you employee relations and resource planning. So each school and diocese has a different mission. You have a different vision. What that means is you need unique set of human resource policies, because your human resources have to be the resources that are going to allow you to fulfill that vision and still be true to your mission. So if you're a two-way immersion school and you have bilingual education, you have to be thinking about bilingual teachers. That's a very specific requirement that is not necessarily going to be evident in a stream school that needs to make sure that their teaching staff has a set of requirements or resources available to them in the sciences and math and engineering. So think about your vision for fulfilling your mission, and then you'll know exactly why your set of human resources will be different and unique from another school's. You're not the same, and that's the beauty of Catholic education. Each one of us has a unique mission, a unique vision, but all of us are Catholic schools, and all of us are infusing Catholic identity into what we do, even into our buildings. And so that puts us to the next slide, facilities, maintenance, and planning. Wow, that's a big one. I had experience as a superintendent, and I used to say to people, I never worried about watching the news 24/7, but became addicted after hurricanes and tornadoes and snowstorms and power outages, because you never know what's going to happen to your building. And so you have to maintain those facilities, the equipment, the technology. You have to support the implementation of the educational mission. The building needs to be designed and constructed in support of the educational mission. What is the curriculum and instructional design that the faculty and the leadership team within the school, the experts, what are they planning on doing, what will it look like, and what resources in terms of facilities, equipment, and technology do they need. That is so critical today. If you're going to have an open classroom, you're going to have a STREAM program. What about your science labs? You're going to have a bilingual education. What are you doing about technology and the support that technology can provide you? So think about the different kinds of curriculum and the curricular learning outcomes that you are striving for your children. Also think about the Catholic identity and the infusion of the rich heritage of Catholic tradition and spirituality, and where are those places in the building that can foster and nurture that kind of growth. So we take a look again at facilities, equipment, and technology, and now look at this. The pie is starting to be covered. A lot of work for that principal, folks. She needs help. He needs help. So now we have technology and facilities, and that kind of leaves us with a few other things. But this is the job description for that principal and president, and or I would love to say the leadership team, which in many cases will be composed of both the principal and the pastor. That takes us to a real quick look at some of those wonderful benchmarks for facilities, equipment, and technology. First of all, and I've just stressed that, you have to show that your plan, its primary purpose is to support the educational program and to provide accessibility for all who seek a Catholic education. So how accessible is your school to an individual in a wheelchair? How accessible if somebody is in 7th grade, and the 7th grade is on the 2nd floor and they show up in a wheelchair? How do you deal with that? What kind of changes do you make? How accessible is your school? This is another one that's very, very difficult. Also accessible to those who have learning differences, accessible to those with special needs. 12.2 talks about a budget that supports depreciation, improvement, replacement. Oh, okay, here's a big question for everybody. How old's your boiler, and when will it need to be replaced? How old's your building? Is it 100 years old and nobody's done anything in 100 years? What about earthquakes? Are you in an earthquake-safe building if you're on the West Coast, or even actually on the East Coast now? Anywhere. What about protection from tornadoes? So think about improvement, replacement, depreciation, and not the kinds of things a principal wakes up thinking about in the morning. And finally, purchasing and improvement. It has to be by design. You can't just simply say, I want a popcorn machine and I'm going to put it in the faculty lounge because I think it would be a really cool thing because I like popcorn. That really happened in a school, folks. Okay? The reality is it has to be by design, it has to be in line with the mission, and most importantly today, you have to be able to demonstrate and model environmental stewardship. All right? Are you recycling? Are you doing all those wonderful things? What about the energy conservation, energy costs? So there's 3 benchmarks, but again, they're not easy to achieve and actually quite challenging. So here's an example of 2 terms that I brought up today, and they'll be in the glossary, and these are the definitions that you'll see. Student accessibility, environmental stewardship. I think you're all familiar with that, but you can see what the definitions look like. So I'm going to jump ahead to Standard 13, and that's advancement and planning. And Standard 13 really is talking about some very critical points. Institutional advancement based on a compelling mission. Does everyone in the school know your mission? Can they say it? Can they share it? Because they are your best communicators, your best marketers, and they are your advancement. You have to formalize this. But first and foremost, the mission should be why people choose your school, and they should be able to share that and shout it from the highest rooftop, the highest mountain, They're called foothills here in Idaho. They look like mountains to me. But will you get up on top of a mountain and shout the mission of your school? Because that's what advancement is about. And if you're doing that well, then you can engage in enrollment management and deal with the doubling of your enrollment in 2 years. And more importantly, development. So here we go. We've got two more. Yes.
Patty, may I
Yes.
interrupt here before we move into the full force of advancement? We have a couple questions on budget and facilities. Are you willing to take them?
Yes.
Okay, there's one question. Can you comment on the concept of budgets based on a tuition setting model rather than an enrollment model?
I'm not clear what that question means. So I think what they're talking about is building a budget that's based on setting tuitions each year that will meet the cost versus setting the budget based on projected enrollments. I'm
Yes,
not sure what they mean by the question. I'm sorry.
Perhaps the questioner could add a few more comments and we can come back to this question then. And then there's the second one. Do you have any sense of where one could go to find a sample of a facility audit?
No, I don't right now, but I'll be happy to find some sources for you. I know that the Archdiocese of Washington does a facilities audit often, looking at all of the buildings and determining what their needs are. So I would check with my diocese first to see if the facilities folks are doing audits, because they usually do, because that property is in the end owned by the diocese. I think if you take a look at your private high schools, I'm sure if you have any private high schools in your area, they would be more than happy, hopefully they'll be more than happy to share with you the kinds of facilities audits that they do. And last but not least, I think you can get examples of facility audits from your public school partners, because they're required to do those for all of the legal reasons associated with using public money. I know we did a facilities audit on a school while I was superintendent, and we actually did bring in 2 folks from the public sector to help us with that audit so that we would have unbiased, objective assessment of what needed to be done to meet the needs of converting the school to a new and different kind of school. So there are others that are using the volunteers that work on their facilities and management committees, some of whom are in the business of doing facilities audits. So, but give you one example, I couldn't put my finger on it right now. I'm sorry. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Standard 13 is about advancement, marketing, and enrollment. So the components, and you'll see in a moment, when we look at the benchmarks, it's really quite simply about those areas. And if I go to the next slide and take a look at the benchmarks, you'll see that the plan ensures that there's contemporary technology for communication, databases, and accountability. As many of you know, Kathy Mears, when she was the executive director for the elementary section of NCEA, has us all tweeting now. So, and also engaging in the use of technology to link our work and to work as one larger community rather than as self-contained entities. This is a really important thing to be doing. So communication, all the different facets of it. Also to have some sort of an annual and continuous review of enrollment and retention. Where are the students coming from in a 3 to 5 mile radius? What other parishes and schools do you overlap with? If they're not coming to your school, are they being homeschooled? Are they going to charter school? Do you know why? And when someone's leaving, why are they leaving? So you really have to have a plan in place that allows you to continuously monitor your enrollment. I'm going to give you a quick example in a moment. 13.3 is that you have to have a development plan that ensures key strategies. You have to be able to identify, grow, and maintain your funding prospects. So I'm going to do a little deep dive right now into Standard 13. You can see from these definitions, this is the example again of the definitions that will be available to you later in the fall. There's language in there that you may not like. Word customer is one. Target market, targeting your market group is another. Who do you want in your school, and are you reaching out to communicate to them? Are you using the technology that 37-year-old with the 5-year-old child is using today, or are we using technology that they consider passé? So think about who your market group is and how they communicate and how you're reaching out to them. The next slide is an enrollment management example. All I'm doing here is hoping to help you to jog your mind about the kinds of things you need to look for when you're looking at your enrollment. So all of these categories across the top, can you fill in the boxes for your school? Can you tell us what zip code every single child lives in and what parish that overlaps with? And that's extremely important because those parishes may want to be partners with you in supporting your school. Go to the next slide and you take a look at the median income from the jurisdiction from where you draw your largest number of children. Also, what are the percentage of families with school-age children? This is Census Bureau data. What are the zip codes of the people who don't live in your jurisdiction? And what's the median income for those families? And then how many Catholic students? How many with 1 to 3 miles? What is the percentage of change? Oh, by the way, talk to the real estate people. What are the housing plans? Are they putting up baby boomer housing? I think that's a nicer name for it today. So that we can all retire, and that means there's not going to be a lot of kids in your neighborhood. So is that going to affect your student population? And if it is, where are you going to reach out? So take a look at that. Also take a look at diversity. What ethnicities are you serving? And are you meeting the needs, particularly of the growing Hispanic population in this country? So benchmark 13.3 says identify, grow, and maintain. What? Those people who can give you money, who can support you. These are your significant funding prospects. Many of them are your alumni, and no one has reached out or spoken to them in years. They would be so proud and pleased to know how well your school is doing. So think about growing those people. And I want to bring this back up again. When a school does not maintain standards for operational vitality, the continuation of the academic excellence is in grave jeopardy, okay? So you must focus on the operation of the school and the 4 key vision areas you need to plan for so the operation is vital and supports your school. It's finance, human resources, development, and facilities, okay? So now I know what your big question is. Next slide. Who and how? Who is going to do it? How do they do it? Well, that's why we have boards. And if you follow Regina Haney's work at NCEA and join that particular division, you can have access to all kinds of fabulous information on how to shape and form your board and also how to create the kinds of committee structures you need, in particular those that can deal with the 4 areas in operational vitality. You need to bring in experts as consultants, as friends. You have volunteers. And all of you who are math and science teachers, here's some great math problems for you to help build models for. And that's the enrollment management piece. And believe it or not, you want a great website, you want to tweet about your school, that's what we have students today to teach us, the elders, how to do it. So if you need to learn how to do some of these things, then just have the students come and teach you. Have them show you. Let them tell you where they're going, where they're getting their information. So what's next? What's next is you have to build a plan. That vision has to have a plan, or you cannot build the other plans in the 4 domains of operational vitality. The really good news is that the Catholic School Standards Project, which is the slide that I have up now, it's a picture of the website. And God bless Lorraine Ozar for making this website possible. And God bless NCEA for hosting these webinars, because they are now posted on the Catholic School Standards Project, so you can learn more about the national standards there. At the same time, if you take a look, you can also go to the assessment tools across the top. You click on that, and the next slide will come up, which is the page that shows you how to use the benchmark. It's a benchmark rubrics overview. You can look up each one of the rubric for every benchmark. So if it's benchmark 13.3, which I just showed you, you can look up the rubric for that benchmark. Every standard, the rubrics for every standard are posted on this site. There's also a drop-down rubric worksheet that you'll be able to use, and that's really fabulous because it will take you through the steps. The benchmark rubric looks something like this. This is 13.2, which is up on the next slide. And you can see you have to do a lot to score a 4. You have to exceed the benchmark. A level 3 fully meets the benchmark. Level 2 partially meets the benchmark. So as you deep dive into these benchmarks and you look at all the things that you could or should be doing, what you will want to do is that you'll want to take a look at the guided process for rubric scoring, which is the next slide. So the guided process for rubric scoring is it's an interactive form that's on the website that allows you to double-click, identify the benchmark, identify the benchmark will pop up, and then you will put the rubric for that benchmark next to you on the screen. So you have 2 things on the screen, the rubric and the drop-down. And this guided process will take you through examining how you're doing on that particular benchmark and allow you to score yourself. And once you know where you are in that benchmark, you can begin to build the plan on how do I improve or how do I change what I'm doing at this time. This is a brand new tool that came out this summer, and we're very excited about it because it's very user-friendly. And finally, the guidelines for interpreting and scoring the benchmarks are coming out this fall, and you'll be able to use them, and I know that you will find them extremely helpful. The guidelines for interpreting and scoring the benchmarks for operational vitality were drafted by the individuals whose names are appearing here. As you can see, we've had some very important people, the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic, Kim, the Secretary of Education in the Archdiocese of Miami, the Dean for the College of Education at Lewis University, and tonight you'll all get to hear from Adam Krukeberg, who is the Associate Dean for Finance in the School of Theology and Ministry at Boston College and really helped craft these standards and benchmarks, and Stephanie Margetts, who is a principal in a Catholic school, in a twin school actually, in Seattle, Washington. So these are the folks who really worked hard all summer on this document, and as a result, next slide, we have Domain 4, 18 benchmarks, 4 standards, and that's operational vitality. It's probably one of the most difficult and challenging domains, I think, that our principals and boards face today. But hey, Catholic schools have always had a challenge with this domain, and we've always succeeded, so I think we'll all do really well. So any questions? I think I've managed to stay on time. Lorraine, are you proud of me?
I am very proud of you. You did better than I did. Yes, we have a couple. We have a question about advancement, but I'm going to just do a quick follow-up with the question about tuition setting, budgeting, because I think actually, Patty, you did address some of this in looking at the market analysis that you were talking about. The added comment is that in his article, A Game-Changing Model for Financially Sustainable Schools, Patrick Bassett declares that in the new normal, budgeting begins with an economic assessment of the community's capacity to pay tuition.
That's true. That's true. And that is exactly what he was touching on. You have to do a complete economic scan of the population you intend to serve. And it has to be very intentional. So if you intend on reaching out and serving a socioeconomically diverse population, no matter where your location is, then you take a good look at how to set the tuition and at the same time how to generate the revenue and tuition assistance you need to make it possible for those who might not be able to pay the full tuition. But that has to be a realistic plan, and the economic analysis of the populations you intend to serve. I will give you one quick example. There's a school in Los Angeles right now in Kevin Baxter's domain, and that school is attracting, it's a two-way immersion school that's attracting folks who can pay the full tuition and more and are now donating to the school, and continuing to serve a large proportion of students from the immediate neighborhood who cannot afford to pay the full tuition. So together, those families are making this school a reality so that there's a diversity of language, a diversity of students, and at the same time socioeconomic diversity. There was an intent, it was the intention of the school to reach out and market the school beyond the immediate neighborhood. And once it caught on, she has a waiting list in there, and she has a waiting list in all of her grades right now.
Thank you. So, we have a question about advancement. Do you see the vision statement in addition to the mission influencing advancement planning?
Absolutely, absolutely. The vision statement is the statement that says how I am going to fulfill this mission, how I'm going to do it. And then as you take that apart, each piece of how is going to cost money. And as you advance the mission and the vision, what you're saying to the potential donor is, I'm inviting you to be a partner with us as we reach this wonderful, audacious goal to be the best stream school in the United States. Not only the best Catholic school, but the best Catholic stream school. So what do you need to do that? And you say to the donor, you could have your name on the lab that we will build for the 7th and 8th graders. Yeah, I think it's very important that the vision is driving in many ways the advancement planning that's going forward. And that advancement planning is also, you can't do it in isolation. It has to be done in collaboration with those who are also building the budget and projecting out what the needs will be. So the advancement folks know what it is they're looking for as they try to fulfill those holes.
We have a comment. Thank goodness for recordings. The speaker had to go so quickly. Thank goodness for recordings. And when exactly will the guidelines for interpreting and scoring the benchmarks be coming out? I can respond to that and say that they are in the final editing draft stage, and they will absolutely be out before the end of the year. I am quite hopeful that they will be out by Thanksgiving, and maybe even, if we got really lucky, before Thanksgiving. But they are in the very final stages of being edited. So we're very close.
Some of us are still working on our glossaries.
I think you'll like them when they come out, though.
Yeah.
Kate, were there any other questions or comments that we need to respond to here?
No, I think you, especially that comment about the tuition and, establishing the budget, that was the more in-depth one. So I thank you for revisiting that question. And it seems like everybody's absorbing all of what you had to share with us today.
Thank you, Patty. It was so helpful and clear.
Well, thank you all for participating today. And it is a great deal to cover in 45, 50 minutes. I will totally agree with everyone. It's overwhelming. And, when we do workshops on this, we always say to everyone, take one benchmark at a time. You move slowly, move carefully. There's a lot here, and it's for many, many, many in leadership roles today. A lot of what's in this domain is new. So I'm hoping that you'll all be able to benefit from today and enjoy the guidelines when they are posted. So thank you all.
Great. And Lorraine, do you have any parting comments before we wrap up our webinar this afternoon?
Well, I think that it is a lot to cover, and we know that to do a whole domain in one 45 to 50-minute presentation. I think you could look at what we're doing as spiraling. Last spring, I did a webinar sponsored by NCEA that was the overview of understanding the whole standards, and now we're circling in by domain. And I think in the spring we're going to look at finding some drilling down again and finding some on-the-ground examples of schools or dioceses that are working on particular things within each of the domains. So we're going to keep drilling, and if you know of any initiatives that it would be really wonderful for others to hear about, please let me know, and we can build it into a webinar.
Great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to thank Drs. Ozar and Weitzel O'Neill for all that they've shared with us this afternoon, and also for hanging in there on some of our technology challenges. Just a few updates I'd like to share with you. We'll be hosting the Principals Bootcamp Forum and President Symposium in November, and we'd like to invite all of those folks to register or to take a look at that event and join us in Baltimore. As Lorraine mentioned, we are having a webinar series, this webinar series, that dives a little bit deeper into each of the domains. So on Tuesday, November 4th, will be the webinar covering governance and leadership, and we invite you to participate there. And then also wanted to let you know that the published version of the National Standards and Benchmarks for Effective Catholic Elementary and Secondary Schools publication is available in the NCEA online store.